So let's continue our conversations from the last time that we had a chance to sit down together. And what I'd really be interested in hearing are your perspectives on the workings of the National Commission, and both the people who were involved with it, the work it did, and your role in working with them.
Well, as you may know, when the National Commission was created, it was created by Public Law 93-348 that was enacted in July of 1974. Oddly enough, and I had drafted a good part of that law for the congressmen and the senators, so I was perhaps as familiar with it as anyone at NIH at that time. And so I think it was, I don't know quite how the secretary got my name, but it was fairly logical that since the law, among other things, created the National Commission or called for the creation of a National Commission, that I was appointed as the department, then HEW, the department's liaison to the National Commission. And as you might guess, being liaison was sort of being the first staff person. So I had to go to different offices, and I won't go through all the details, but it took us about 3 months to get a bank account so we could travel the commission. It took us several months to find furniture, to find a building, offices where they could meet, and the like. And so I spent a lot of time with those details. They're very vague in my mind, and I'm certainly not going to bore you with that, except to say it took the best part of the rest of the summer. And so the commission did not meet until December of 1974. By that time, Cap Weinberger had appointed all the members, and they met for the first time in December of 74. And their mandate was very broad, lacking in specificity. So in a major sense, I think they created their own agenda. And they knew in a general sense that what they were to do was to deal with or set a framework for the conduct of research involving human subjects. And beyond that, they didn't have many mandates except for one. And that was one that I wrote into the law as a kind of last-minute thought. And it was that, among other things that the commission will address, they are to address principles of ethics that can be broadly applied to the field. I had in mind for those principles such things as the principle of the double effect. If you do something that has both a positive and a negative effect, you weigh the two effects in your mind, and if the positive effect outweighs the negative, you can go ahead and do something. I think most of us function that way in our lives anyway, but I wanted the commission to say that IRBs could approve research where there is a foreseeable negative effect, so long as the expected positive effects outweighed them. The commission didn't understand principles in that way, and so over the course of the next 4 years, they debated what those principles should be, and finally, in the last year of their existence, they issued the principles of respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. And those principles now have become pretty much established in all American institutions that carry out research. And I think gradually, you might know better than I think they are gradually being accepted worldwide. So my inspiration to challenge the commission to write about principles has paid off in ways that I did not intend and never would have guessed what they would come up with.
So Charlie, who was the first main staff member of the National Commission?
That was Dr. Charlie Lowe, who was the senior scientist in the National Institute for Child Health. A little background there. While the commission was itself getting organized, there was a congressman from New England who obtained some photographs of beheaded, aborted fetuses. And he circulated those pictures, dreadful, awful pictures, to every member of the Congress, both the Senate and the House, with a letter that accused NIH of funding the research that was both encouraging abortions at different stages in the development of the fetus, and then studying the fetus after removal from the uterus. And so this caused an uproar in Congress. We got floods of letters. The news carried this story over and over and over again. NIH was befuddled. We could find no research that we were funding that was even remotely similar to this. But finally we found that a graduate student from somewhere in New England had traveled to Finland, and there he found a laboratory where there was a man not using not NIH money or American money, but he was conducting this research. And the student was pretty horrified, but he took pictures of these tiny fetal heads mounted on stakes and circulated them everywhere. So the Congress immediately acted, and it said until the commission could address the question of what fetal research might be allowed or not allowed, NIH could fund no research of any kind dealing with pregnancy, with the development of the fetus, and not even early childhood. So that was the first crisis that was presented to the commission. And so it seemed logical then that Charlie Lowe, who was the senior scientist in the Center for Child Health and Human Development, should be the first staff director. It didn't work out that way. Charlie had strong ideas of what the commission should do and not do, and he made no bones about telling the commissioners what they should say or what they should write or what they should declare. And the commissioners were not very passive people. Consequently, they rebelled, and after about 3 months, Charlie Lowe was removed. I think it was the secretary himself. No one ever said who actually fired him, but he was suddenly absent from the commission meetings. But those first months were spent almost entirely in debates about what research is or is not permissible involving the human fetus. It's interesting that fetal research has gone forward in most of the institutions in the country, but NIH is still forbidden to do research involving the human fetus. And perhaps that's a good thing, because fetal research associated with the abortion question and all of those public issues is so controversial I think NIH would be embroiled in controversy all the time. This way they can say, we don't fund and we don't conduct field research. And they look at almost every other health issue. And consequently, I think, although I wouldn't have designed it that way, looking back in history, I think it was a good thing that NIH was prevented from doing that, and obviously lots of other institutions have done field research, so it's not a field that's neglected. In any case, the first report then that the commission put out was a report on field research. And there was a doctor who had actually cared for the Kennedy girl who herself was retarded. And I think it prompted Senator Kennedy's interest in creating the commission by law. And so it was probably his influence that, and I'm blocking on that man's name, but maybe it'll come to me before we're done. But he wrote a good part of the report on field research. And so the very first regulations that our office, the Office for Protection from Research Risks, actually wrote was in response to the Commission's report on field research. And as I look back, I can see both shortcomings in the way the Commission was functioning. It was getting used to functioning, and they allowed one or two people to dominate the discussion. And our own office had never written regulations before. So the very first regulations we wrote were based on a flawed report of the National Commission. And that's, I think that regulation has been revised more times perhaps than any other part of the Federal Register regulations. So that's how the commission got off to a somewhat rocky start.
So let me back up just a little bit. And one thing, you'd mentioned that in putting the committee together, that the commissioners, as part of the startup, were appointed by Caspar Weinberger. What do you recall in terms of the process for how they identified commissioners?
The process was kept secret. No one that I've ever run across knows how Cap Weinberger selected the members. He announced the members one day, and we do not know. It was the best kept secret in the government. And even after he left the secretarial job and was interviewed, he never would reveal where his list came from. Mm-hmm. So it was a total surprise to NIH, and there were people on the commission who had very little public reputation, who served very well. So I think in hindsight, we have to say Cap Weinberger did well, but never again, either before or since, have I ever seen a commission created that way, where it seemed to leap directly out of the secretary's head with no consultation. I talked to his staff, I talked to secretaries. Nobody seemed to know where he got those names.
And in thinking back on the commissioners themselves, are there one or two individuals that stand out, either because because their contributions ended up exceeding your expectations, or because they simply were stellar individuals that you hadn't had a chance to see in action before, and here they were on this stage of being part of the commission?
Well, I think that the chairman, Ken Ryan, himself was a pediatrician. He was very quiet. He simply saw initially he simply saw his role as keeping order, making sure everybody got a chance to speak. And he himself remained quiet, surprisingly quiet for the first year. The commission lasted 4 years, and we saw Ryan as kind of simply a chairperson keeping order in the commission. Gradually, as things moved along, he took a much stronger hand drafting policies that eventually found their way into regulation. And I think every commissioner would tell you that he probably was the key figure in probably at least 12 or 13 of the 16 reports that came out of the commission. And yet he maybe said less publicly than any of the other commissioners. Much of what he did was drafting, writing, circulating drafts, and then encouraging the commission to debate his drafts. And but the commission didn't change them as much as one might have expected, because they were a pretty independent bunch. Mm-hmm. I think Al Johnson played a major role. Al had been a Jesuit priest. He was well trained in moral theology, had taught out on the West Coast, I think at the University of California, San Francisco, and ended up later at University of Washington. But he was both brilliant, articulate, and he was also very engaging. He would sprinkle funny stories in the middle of his arguments for different positions that he held. And that made him both very popular. It made the meetings that were long. There was one meeting held for 2 days each month, except December, when the Christmas holidays intervened. Mm-hmm. And so the commissioners worked very hard. Another who surprised us, she was then a young ethics prof at a California school. I think it was a small school, and I've forgotten which one it was, but it was Pat King. Pat was a trained lawyer from, and eventually ended up on the Georgetown law staff. And she was very concerned about the rights of minorities, she was very concerned for research that involved people whose English was not very proficient. At the time, I think there were a lot of Hispanics and African American people involved in research. Oftentimes, there were at least stories, not all of them well documented, but stories that these people were roped into research, didn't know what they were getting into. And so she saw herself as protecting the rights and the well-being of those subjects of research. And I think laid the foundation for the principle of justice in the final report of the commission. So she was a surprise. She was a young woman at the time. I don't think she had published anything. She was kind of a surprise to everyone. She was very articulate, very brilliant, but without much reputation, and she played a major role. I think Bob Levine, who was a staff person, had perhaps had as much experience as anyone dealing with research at the time, and had thought very consistently and deeply. He started out with a great respect for the Helsinki principles that had come out earlier from Europe. And so Bob reminded the commission again and again about what Helsinki said. I think at times they reacted negatively a little. They said, we're an American commission, we're not the European Commission. And in a quiet way, I think they reacted negatively, but often ended up coming around to a position that Bob had suggested.
Let's come back to the staff members in just a minute. Following up on the thinking about the commissioners themselves, if we were able to ask Chairman Ryan today the question, was there a member that was a particular thorn in his side or difficult to deal with? Are there any personalities that pop out who really were challenging members of the commission, particularly if you were in the role of the chairman?
I would answer that question negatively, and I think it was partly because of his leadership. One of the things that he introduced, I think from the very first meeting, was that when they came to town for a meeting, they met most of the time in Washington, D.C., he would always schedule a cocktail party before the commission began meeting. There were a number of raconteurs. I think I only was invited to one or two of those. Usually no staff were invited. So what we knew about those parties was that there were lots of jokes, there was a lot of kidding, there were people letting their hair down, telling funny stories about themselves or their wives or their children. And I think the commission bonded in a way that was truly remarkable. So I would answer your question about was there anyone who was a particular thorn in his side. If there was such a person, he didn't reveal it publicly. And I really, the one who drew all the fire in the beginning was Charlie Lowe, and they did act and asked him to exit. He was deeply hurt, and Charlie was a good friend of mine. Even though he was very dogmatic, he was a good friend, and I felt sorry for him. But I think the commission acted wisely. They wanted a staff that would be responsive to them, and I think Charlie thought of the staff as telling them what they should conclude. And this was not a docile commission by any means. I think Al Johnson played a big role, and I'm blocking on the name of the pediatrician that was there, but he played a big role. And then there was a man who was a lawyer, and he died very early in the commission's deliberations, but he was a constitutional lawyer and a very profound thinker. He did not know very much about medicine, but he stressed and introduced language of respect for the rights and the well-being of subjects, I think, in a way that it had not been expressed prior to that time. I don't think they were new thoughts or that they were not well-rooted in our judicial system, but that language of respect runs all through the reports of the commission, and I think it's because he was highly respected, and he didn't say a lot at every meeting, but when he spoke, everybody listened and took notes and was very respectful.
So one last question about the commissioners themselves, and that's. It's more a question of looking back, and one of the contemporary common critiques of the commission and its work is that it was lacking in representatives from the social sciences. I'm curious as to your thoughts on that.
The commission was well aware that the law called on them to issue statements and guidance on social science and behavioral science. They decided to address the medical issues first. What they anticipated was that at the end of their 4 years, they would be extended another year to do the social science, and they were going to bring in, they for every meeting they brought in lots of witnesses, and they were going to hear some of the best social scientists in the country. And as it happened, when they completed 4 years, they were disbanded. And so I think it was not their intent to do that, but it is true that they did not have many social scientists. The issues of the day were primarily, that were publicly debated, were primarily medical. And so I think by hindsight, they probably made a mistake by putting off the social sciences, the science issues until the end, and then ran out of time. They were not continued for one more year as expected, and that work never was completed. I think they had drafted, or at least planned to draft, 3 more reports on social science research. They never saw the light of day, and I don't know what they would have said. They did get some guidance. They had a professor from the University of Chicago who represented the social sciences, and he held one meeting in which he chaired a meeting outside the commission meetings just to gather opinions. I attended that meeting, and I think something might have come of it, but he had 8 or 10 top social science researchers at that meeting, which was held down in New Mexico, by the way, but the commission supported it. And as often happens, it was the Tower of Babel. They had so many opinions, many of which were well worth following up on. But since there was no follow-up meeting, I don't think very much came of it. But there was an effort made, or at least initiated, but not followed through. And so I think it's a legitimate criticism of the commission, but I'm not quite sure where the blame should lie. I certainly don't blame the commissioners. They had no control over how long they were going to stay in existence. So I think it was more a matter of a change in politics. And consequently, in the Reagan years, I don't think that the commission was favored by the new administration. And so the funding dried up and the commission disbanded. And I think with it went the social science issues that might have been addressed but never actually were.
So much has been made of the extraordinarily talented staff that supported the work of the commission.
I don't know what the public thinks, but I can tell you in the Department of Health and Human Services, HEW, the Health, Education, and Welfare, that it is regarded as the best public commission ever assembled. And not just because there were very good members on the commission, but for several reasons. One, Dr. Leroy Walters had obtained a grant from the Library of Medicine and was collecting the National Library of Ethics literature, which is part of the National Library, but it's housed at Georgetown University, and he was the senior librarian and collected the best ethics articles, books, periodicals from 43 different countries worldwide, and managed to present bibliographies for every meeting to all the commissioners, and actually had done enormous amount of work so that sections of important books or articles were called to their attention. They couldn't possibly have read all the stuff that he outlined for them, but he helped them to find the key parts of hundreds of articles. So they were well informed, and that information got into their discussions. So if I had to pick out someone who got very little credit, was silent, almost entirely silent during the meetings, it would be Dr. Leroy Walters, who actually provided material for the commission to meld into its various reports. And I would call him the kind of unsung, unheralded supporter of the commission. And I think he was the one who brought together all the material that ended up in the final ethics report on the principles. Mm-hmm. So that, again, and he was at the first meeting helping them to find the materials, how to get organized. Then he left. So the work was done by them, but the spade work and the research, and Leroy was just extraordinary in the amount of material that he supplied and marked up for the commissioners to use. So he was an important contribution. Tom Beecham was another who was, along with his wife, was writing his first textbook on bioethics. It's been revised, I guess, half a dozen times. And Tom was very quiet in the meetings, but very articulate in between the meetings. And I think he is another who played a kind of important but not heralded role in the commission's work. I would pick out those people: Bob Levine, Leroy Walters, Tom Beecham, as being, in effect, they were commissioners themselves. They influenced the commission so much that although you can't find them in the recordings of the meetings, their work is spread all through those meetings. So that's about what I remember, and I'm sure that different commissioners would give you a somewhat different impression because they had different favorites, different topics that interested them. So some of them were silent on one topic and articulate on another. And the staff worked very hard to capture their thoughts, put them into workable drafts, and then the commission polished them up. But there's no doubt that the commission was not passive. It very carefully edited everything that it published. And I don't think there are very many federal commissions like that. They like the staff to do the work, and they like to put their names on the reports. But that was not the National Commission.
And how would you characterize what kind of pressures were they operating under during this time?
Well, the very first one I've already mentioned was the pressure on field research. By the way, finally, the source of those pictures was identified, and it kind of backfired on Ron Kahlo. He lost the next election, so he was a one-term congressman from somewhere in New England, I've forgotten where. But after that mischief of circulating the fetal heads and then finding out it was not as he had described it, he lost credibility and lost the election. He was not punished in any way other than leaving office. But I don't know quite how to summarize the work of the commission, because there just has never been any other commission. There have been lots of other commissions, but any other that was quite as influential as that one.
Do you think at the time that the commissioners or the staff or people like yourself had a sense of what the lasting impact of their work would be? Or were there times where maybe they thought of themselves as just another federal commission?
Well, I don't know quite how to answer that yes or no. What I can tell you is that starting under Don Chalkley and then beginning back in 1974, the Office for Protection from Research Risks had begun to publish regulations for the protection of human subjects. And so we were hearing all that they were talking about in the context of how are we going to translate this into regulatory form and still keep regulatory form often is very dry. It's yes and no. It has to be clear, but it has to be flexible. So one of the things I did was persuade. We had already, after the very first session, published the rules on fetal research. We were not very happy with those rules, and I think the public was not happy. As a consequence, I persuaded a man named Richard Reisberg, Dick Reisberg, who was in the Office of General Counsel, and he had been assigned to help us draft regulations. I persuaded him to come to all the commission meetings after the first year. He had no background in ethics, but he was a brilliant man. He listened carefully to the workings of the commission, and he then drafted all the regulations that followed the work of the commission. And those regulations are now the oldest standing regulations in the federal government. They were both flexible. They did not settle questions for which we had no answers, but they created a framework in which IRBs could work and develop and create a literature so that today I think the institutional review boards in institutions all over the country find that they can still work within that framework. There's enough flexibility so that they can approve most of the research that is proposed, often with adjustments for further protection for the subjects, but it has not decreased the amount of research involving humans in any way. And I think it was something near genius. Almost every year somebody proposes scrapping the regulations, and then when the new draft comes out, it usually fails because it's not as good as what we already have. And that largely was the work of Dick Reisberg. And just a little aside, it was very difficult. The General Counsel's office was overworked and understaffed. Maybe it still is, but it certainly was in those days. Consequently, if I made an appointment for Reisberg, with Reisberg, I would call his secretary. I would be scheduled for a month or 6 weeks ahead. By then, the issues would have passed. But he came from Springfield, Massachusetts, and I found out he had played hockey as a high school student, and I think his first year or second year college. He loved hockey, and so I bought him a season ticket to the Caps hockey team, and I bought two season tickets, one for Reisberg and one for me. And that's how we got most of our business done, because hockey has 2 periods, which means that you have 40 minutes in between the game that's being played to ask questions And I would have my notebook full of questions, and people said, how do you get attention from the general counsel's office? We can never get an opinion out of them. It takes months to get around to our issues. And I said, well, you just have to be fortunate. And so I never revealed that till the regulations were published. But and so my wife quickly understood, planned meals, dinners, entertainment, everything around hockey games. And the hockey games were, I did lots of homework before every hockey game, not about hockey. I came from Minnesota and I loved hockey myself. So we did root for the Caps, who were terrible in those days. But what it really enabled me to do was to get the regulations written. And that's how we did it. I can't imagine how we could have done all that we did without those hockey games. Mm-hmm. So that's just a kind of an aside. Sometimes you have to use a little imagination to find a way to get your work done.
So Charlie, when people talk about the commission's work these days, obviously most people immediately gravitate towards the Belmont report. But that's not the only work they produced. You know, are there other reports that the commission put out that you think have been overshadowed by the Belmont report and are maybe ignored more than they should be, that come to mind as being remarkable or important?
They did some reports and some considerable amount of criticism, one of research in prisons. There's a whole report on prisons. And I think to some extent it's not as relevant today as it was then. At that time, the drug firms were conducting much of their research in drugs in state penitentiaries. And that meant long-time prisoners. And the regulations that finally came out are so stringent that I don't think much of that is going on today. I think the drug firms are contracting with the universities, and the universities occasionally do drugs research with the local jails, but those are often short-time sentences, and consequently, jail residents are not very good research subjects. In Virginia, particularly, where I work now, we find that the cooperation from the medical staff, which is constantly turning over, makes it nearly impossible for us to conduct research. Even though we comply with the rules, we can't manage the bureaucracy that governs the jails and the prisons. So, but I think at the time, and for some years after the commission, I think the report on prisoners was much better than the regulations on prisoners. They had been drafted before I got to OPRR by a staff person under Don Chalkley. And to this day, I think they are inferior. We were never able, for reasons I've never been able to pin down, never able to get a common set of rules with the FDA. They cooperated with NIH on every other set of rules to the extent possible, given that the two agencies are guided by different pieces of legislation. But they never cooperated with us in protection of prisoners. And of course, the best use of prisoners, at least the easiest use for researchers, is to test drugs because the surrounding conditions can be so stable in a long-term prison sentence that it's an ideal place to test drugs, and you can see the effect daily, and the lives of the prisoners don't change very much from day to day, week to week, month to month. So that's a report, I think, that was and perhaps still is underutilized. by the commissioners. You already pointed out that their work on behavioral research was really never very effective and never very, it was not as good as the rest of the work of the commission. I think those were the major contributions of the commission. And in fact, I think they tended to point toward Belmont in a way that had they drafted Belmont earlier, I think it would have been a very different document and perhaps nowhere near as useful as it has turned out to be. With respect to Belmont, I think my own critique would be that when they got to the principle of justice, they did not have a uniform view of what justice should be. And consequently, I think that part of the Belmont report is still very vague and very hard to apply. I think young legal medical scholars should go back and not that there's anything wrong with Belmont, but I think it lacks enough specificity to make it easily applicable. As I've traveled around the country, I think at one time I counted up 278 different IRB meetings that I had sat in on in different parts of the country, in different universities. And I would almost always hear about the first two principles and rarely hear mentioned the principle of justice. And I think it's because universities, IRBs, still don't know how to apply Belmont. They agree with everything it says, but they don't know how to make it practical or practicable and apply it in their situations. Part of Belmont calls for making sure that all segments of the society have access to research, and no segment of society is studied more than any other. That's a very hard principle to put in practice because universities draw from the communities in which they're located, and a major part of the research done in this country, and abroad for that matter, certainly throughout Europe, a major part is done in communities, and so we do have a few universities that have access to large numbers of African Americans, but we have many universities that don't draw from that population, and the researchers do the best they can to have a variety of people in their studies, but in fact they draw from local communities, and so that's one flaw. The second is that after the Tuskegee syphilis study has left a deep scar in the African American community, and there is still a high level of mistrust of research. Even these many years, I often talk to African Americans because we have many of them come to our hospital in Virginia, in Richmond, and they tell me grotesque stories about Tuskegee that are far worse than the actual study, of terrible things that were done to these black men where, in fact, they were not abused, they were not treated as well as they should have been, but it's not that anything bad was done to them, it is that good things were withheld from them. But the stories in the African American community that have been handed down are far from the facts, and I think it has kept them away from volunteering for research in a major way. We are finding also great difficulty in finding people who are both medically knowledgeable and articulate in foreign languages to deal with populations for whom English is either unknown or a second language. And while we can usually find somebody that speaks the language, we cannot find very many people who speak the language and know something about science. Right. And it makes the obtaining of informed consent very difficult. The Commission did not deal with those problems or how IRBs might accommodate themselves to dealing with them. And I think there's still major problems in research in this country, not to mention even research that's conducted overseas. So that's an area where I think we still could use another commission to help us to solve and to bend rules where they should be bent and to uphold rules where they should not be bent. And I think IRBs struggle with this. I think the international community struggles with this. And I don't have very good answers for some of those issues. So I think the first two principles of Belmont are well understood and well applied, even in foreign settings. But the third principle, I think, is neglected.
So I don't want to go too far off track, but one of the things that you just said raised a question in my mind, which is you noted that that some of these unresolved issues may, in a way, be evidence that a new commission is needed. As you're very well aware, there have been numerous commissions from the time of the end of the National
Yes.
Commission to the present, including the current Presidential Commission on the Study of Bioethical Issues. Do you have a sense of why those, whether it's the National Bioethics Advisory Committee or the current President's Commission, what is different in the sense that they don't seem to be able to have the same long-lasting impact of?
I don't know. I don't think I'm the right person to answer that question. One, I was very close to the National Commission in that I attended all except one of their meetings over a 4-year period. So I really saw how they worked. I have not been staff or present at very many meetings of other commissions. But what I saw in the President's Commission that immediately succeeded the National Commission was that staff played a much greater role. They planned the meetings, they planned the agendas, they interviewed scholars and witnesses, and they drafted the reports. The commissioners heard all the testimony, but the commissioners played in most of the President's Commission, they played the role of a jury, listening, deciding, hearing testimony on all kinds of questions, and then having the staff write an opinion, and they would endorse it. The National Commission was not like that. They were proactive. They raised the questions. They read the literature. They drafted many parts of those reports. It's true the staff polished them and called attention to lacunae that were left out of some of the reports. But it was a proactive commission in a way that I don't remember any other commission functioning that way, with one possible exception, and that was the Secretary's Ethics Advisory Board. And that was, that it immediately followed the National Commission.
So we've already started talking a little bit about the Belmont report itself, and I'm going to start with a fairly trivial question, but one that I've always been curious about, and I'll use this opportunity to ask it, which is, who selected the Belmont Conference Center as the place to have these meetings, as it's now been memorialized as the name of the report?
I can't be sure, but the staff director was Michael Yesley, who succeeded Charlie Lowe. And Michael quickly saw that the commission wanted them to function as staff who would listen to the debates and the arguments and then write reports based on what the commissioners said. Mm-hmm. And that staff became well aware that the commissioners themselves wanted opportunity to meet and to discuss. And so I'm going to hazard a guess that it was Michael Yesley who set that up. It was not unusual, since it was just across the border from Washington, D.C. into Maryland. It was not unusual for federal offices, bodies, various federal functions to be held in that conference center. So I'm sure if he just talked to his colleagues and said, where is there a comfortable place where we can meet and discuss, somebody probably recommended it to him, and he had authority to contract for the commission to meet there for a few days. But once again, it was Leroy Walters who offered the very first draft, mm-hmm. And then left. So he was not involved in drafting, but he had already identified three principles. And of course, he did that partly because of his reading, but partly because he himself had attended most of the commission meetings, mm-hmm. Just as an audience. He had also provided much of the material, as I indicated before.
And as the date approached for the dissemination of the Belmont report, was there a sense that it would be a document of such importance?
I don't think so. It is my recollection. I was in OPR and also liaisoned to the commission, so it fell to me to publish in the Federal Register each of the reports of the commission as they were produced. And after the first or second one, we learned a routine of contacting the Federal Register, and we had to redact the reports into a certain kind of typing mode and so on. Once we learned the technique, it was kind of automatic. And so when we published Belmont, I don't think we saw it as being different or outside of the rest of the work of the commission, or as in itself standing by itself. I attended the meetings and I recognized these are overarching principles. And so, of course, it's different than research in children or research in the retarded or research in surgery that were on specific topics, mm-hmm. But in the sense that it would take on a kind of life of its own, I don't think I foresaw that. Whether others did, I cannot answer, but I'd like to say, yes, I was wise enough to see that it would be the major work of the commission, but I have to admit that I don't think I saw that.